But you do talk in your book about problems with traditional media, beyond just the business problem. And one of those is trust in the news media has declined. And you tried to diagnose why that is. And one option is that there is a perception of bias. But you say you think that's a bum rap. Explain why.
Okay, well, first of all, we have to look at the numbers, the Gallup poll numbers about trust in the media. The question is asked, do you trust the news media to do a fair and accurate job of reporting and analyzing the news? And this number peaked at about 72% right after Watergate, for the obvious reason that everybody understood how valuable the press was in uncovering the scandals of the Nixon administration. But ever since, it's been on a decline. And right now, those Gallup numbers are down to about 32%. That is less than a third of the people asked the question, do you trust the news media to do a fair and accurate job? Only 32% said yes, which is astonishing. And so I asked the question in the book, why is this so? And one of the reasons that's often advanced is that, well, the media is biased. You know, if you're a conservative, you think the media is too liberal. If you're a liberal, you think the media is too conservative. There's actually a name for that. It's called the hostile media effect. If you think one way, the media, in your view, is biased the other way. And I just think the evidences and the analytic studies that have been done and the content analysis that have been done do not support the notion that the press is biased one way or the other. Yes, there are stories that are biased, clearly, or wrong-headed stories that get done. But I didn't find that to be a compelling reason for why people do not trust the news media. To me, it was more the charge that the media is really too elitist for the average person. That we're just
explain why you think elitism is a problem.
Well, what they think is that we're just coastal snobs who regard the rest of the country as flyover country, and we don't care about what's going on in middle America, working class America.
And that's kind of true, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the more I thought about it, and I did some research for this chapter and came to the conclusion that this is not a bum rap, that there is an elitism in much of the media. And if you think about it, I mean, I looked at some examples. You know, you look at sports sections of papers in the Northeast, and they write about lacrosse, which is surely an elite sport. And they very rarely write about stock car racing, which is embraced by millions and millions of people around the country. They didn't understand the opioid epidemic that happened in places like Albuquerque and New Mexico or Louisville, Kentucky. They were very good at covering medical research at our finest hospitals, but they didn't understand the causes of the opioid crisis and you know, damn near missed the story. So there are a lot of examples of that. They rarely write about community colleges. Half of the undergraduates in the United States go to a community college, but you find a lot about elite colleges. You find a lot of coverage about the Ivy League and elite colleges, and you don't find much about community colleges that educate so many people. So there is some validity to this charge of that there's an elitism, that they're catering to an elite audience that doesn't care about community colleges and doesn't care about, you know, and that is one of the reasons why the press missed the story about Donald Trump, why they were so wrong in the election of 2016, is they didn't understand what his appeal was. They didn't understand that many people of middle America were hurting very badly and were upset about technological change and globalization and immigration. And they didn't get it. And that's why we missed the story that Donald Trump won in 2016. And frankly, now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wondered if you were surprised by the amount of angst and anger among the American electorate that definitely caught the media by surprise in the last two elections. But, you know, based on your analysis of what was wrong with mainstream media, at least, were you also surprised, or did you think that we had it coming?
Well, I think both things could be true. I was surprised to some degree and still felt we had it coming, because I think the charge is really true. We don't do a good enough job of understanding what's going on in working class America, middle America, whatever you want to call it. And that's a shame. And you know what? It happened in the 2020 election as well. It's true that the media more or less understood or thought that Biden was going to win, but we had no idea how strong the Republicans were going to do. They did not lose one state legislature that they held before the election, not one. They missed the story. We missed the story of the inroads Trump and the Republicans were able to make among Latino voters, which we thought was, pretty much a Democratic slam dunk. It turned out not to be. We didn't do well. We missed the Republican pickup in the House of Representatives. They gained seats in the House. Nobody expected that to happen. And the Democrats won the Senate mostly because of a fluke. There were two races at once, and Trump managed to be his own worst enemy, and the Democrats won both seats. But basically, the Republicans did a lot better in 2020, even though they lost the presidency.
I'm going to just stop for a second and ask Chad, who is our technology guru behind the scenes, to unmute the first three people who want to ask questions, and that's Joe Weber, Dori Jones-Yang, and Mark Vamos. And the questions are starting to pile up, so you have to agree to unmute yourself. And all of those questions are related to what we're talking about right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe Weber to ask his question.
It's very kind of you, Paula, and it's great to see you. Let me correct one thing you said. Steve has actually written 3 books. I've read all 3 of them, and they are wonderful. I have a couple questions, and maybe I'll start with, maybe I'll just say the 2 of them because they're not unrelated. Journalism factories like McGraw-Hill were just wonderful things at one time. It was the home of a bevy of trade books and, of course, BusinessWeek. But they seem to be a thing of the past. Do you see anything like them out there now, or see a way that similar organizations could be created in the era of the net? And my second question is, it's my view, frankly, that opinionation is rife throughout journalism these days. You have a view of fairness versus objectivity that, very frankly, has guided me as I've been teaching journalism students. But I do wonder if you would agree that too many bastions of fairness have lost the tether to objectivity, at least as an ideal.
Well, let me take the first part of the question first, and good to see you, Joe. There were large media companies back in the day when I was starting, which is to say in the 60s, and it lasted for quite a while. McGraw-Hill does no longer exists. It's split into 2 companies, Standard & Poor's and the old book publishing. McGraw-Hill publishes textbooks, but there's very little journalism left at McGraw-Hill. They don't have any of the magazines that they used to have. Bloomberg is now the owner of BusinessWeek magazine, which happened in the year 2009, and they've pretty much given up on journalism. And Time Inc. no longer exists the way it used to. So yes, you're right that a lot of the big media companies really do not exist anymore. A lot of the newspapers are shedding jobs rather than hiring. The good news is that a lot of new places have sprung up and are hiring people. And this is what we call new media for the most part. And that's where the opportunity, a lot of our students graduate. Now, these are people coming out with a master's degree in journalism. They're a little bit older, they've had some experience, but they're getting jobs less at traditional places. Yes, some of them go to newspapers and magazines, but most of them are working at BuzzFeed, the Huffington Post, the ProPublica, things like that, that didn't exist in our day when we were starting. So I think it's just a changed world, and there are opportunities. All of our students, just about all of them, get jobs in journalism, and I think that's true at Columbia and the school you were teaching at, University of Nebraska. I think that also true there. So it's not a problem of getting jobs in journalism. To the second part of your question, which is the notion of fairness versus objectivity, I do make a very big point in the book about not being a believer in the word objectivity. It's just fraught with semantic difficulty. It's just very hard to explain what it means. And my test, always in the years that I worked on magazines, was a fairness test rather than an objective test. That you know, we were doing point of view journalism. Magazines were interpretive kinds of journalism. They weren't a daily newspaper. The daily newspapers aren't daily newspapers in the way they used to be. They are much more analytical than they used to be because of the web and the ability to get breaking news anywhere, anytime. So newspapers have become much more analytical, and magazines have moved upstream and become much more point of view magazines. A lot of them are still doing very well. The Economist, the New Yorker, Bloomberg BusinessWeek is a very good magazine. It's supported by Michael Bloomberg. It doesn't make money, and that's a problem if you're not supported by somebody who can keep it afloat. But the journalism is there, and my test is fairness. That is, your story can have a point of view, but it has to be fair in considering the opposite side of the story and explaining why that doesn't cut it in your particular viewpoint. And you have to use a lot of multiple sources. You have to have reporters who are trained in particular beats. And that's what I call fairness. And we're not attempting to be objective. We were attempting to have a point of view that would be seen by readers as fair. I may not agree with it, but I understand what they're saying. They're recognizing my point of view, which is different from theirs. And I don't mind listening to their argument. And that's my standard of journalism, at least for analytic magazines. Does that answer it, Joe?
Well, my question has to do with fairness too, and I was just wondering the extent to which, nice to see you, the extent to which the in 1987, when the FCC eliminated the fairness doctrine, if that, my impression is that's one of the main reasons for the rising distrust in journalism in general, because it allowed the left to go left and the right to go right, and created this rift today. Is that the way you see it?
You know, 1987 was a long time ago because it was well before social media came along, which really was the revolution. The end of the fairness doctrine, first of all, it only affected broadcast journalism. It didn't affect print media at all because there was no fairness doctrine that applied to print media. And the reason it applied to broadcast media is because the broadcast spectrum was limited and it was licensed by the government. So there was a fairness doctrine because they wanted everybody to be so-called fair, and they got rid of it because they felt it was no longer necessary. And I don't think television in the 1980s turned into a left versus right kind of thing. I think the problem was really the opposite. They didn't stand for anything. You'd watch the nightly news and it didn't add a lot of value sometimes, and it didn't have a point of view. And so I don't think that played that much a role. I think what is happening now is much more profound. That the rise of social media has had much more effect on traditional journalism and the politics of journalism than anything that happened in the 80s or even the 90s.
I guess my point was that maybe Fox News and some of the other TV stations, TV networks, I guess that was really the rise of cable more that allowed that, but allowed the TV media to be so extreme.
Yeah, it was cable TV. And you have to remember, you know, until recently, cable TV had very, very small audiences compared to broadcast television. And it's only been in the last several years as they become more and more politicized that you've seen this split between Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left and CNN more or less in the middle. And they've had a profound influence, even though their audience is still very, very small compared to the nightly news on the three networks. Yeah, we're in a different world now, no question about it. Good to see you, Dori.